The easiest way to expose a corrupt officer is not to chase him. It is to give him one more chance to reveal who he really is. The conference room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector mounted on the ceiling. A large screen glowed at the front of the room, displaying a photograph of Officer Ryan Mitchell in full uniform. Around the polished oak table sat federal investigators, attorneys, and senior officials. Nobody was speaking. Nobody needed to. Every person in the room understood the significance of what they were looking at. At the head of the table sat Naomi Carter, a composed black woman in a dark navy blazer. A thick investigation file rested in front of her. Her hands were folded calmly, her expression unreadable. Across the screen, lines of evidence, reports, and timelines filled the display. Months of work had led to this moment. One of the attorneys finally broke the silence. "Was this enough?" he asked quietly. "Was there enough evidence to move forward?" Naomi looked toward the screen. The image of Ryan Mitchell remained frozen there, confident and unaware. For a few seconds she said nothing. Then she answered, "He made the decision for us this morning." Several people exchanged glances. Nobody asked what she meant. They already knew something had happened less than an hour earlier. Something unexpected. Something that had transformed an already serious investigation into something impossible to ignore. Naomi slowly closed the folder in front of her. The room remained still. Outside the conference room windows, Washington sunlight reflected off nearby office buildings. Cars moved through crowded streets below. Ordinary people continued with ordinary lives, unaware that a federal operation was approaching its final chapter. Imagine spending months gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, reviewing reports, and following every lead, only to discover that the final piece of the puzzle arrives not through a hidden document or secret recording, but through a simple choice made in public. That was exactly what had happened. The operation had been active for months. Multiple agencies had quietly contributed information. Complaints that once seemed unrelated had begun forming a larger pattern. Names appeared repeatedly. Certain reports raised questions. Certain incidents refused to disappear. And again, one name remained near the center of the investigation: Ryan Mitchell. Yet despite everything investigators had collected, Naomi knew one thing. Character is easiest to measure when a person believes nobody important is watching. That was why she had spent the morning outside the courthouse. That was why she had arrived alone. That was why nobody knew who she really was. The attorney leaned forward. "What exactly happened?" Naomi looked down briefly before meeting his eyes. "He showed us who he was." Her voice remained calm. There was no anger in it. No satisfaction. Only certainty. The projector light reflected softly across the conference table as another image appeared on the screen. A courthouse entrance. Morning sunlight. People walking in and out of the building. Somewhere in that ordinary scene, everything had changed. Naomi glanced at the photograph and remembered every second of it. The sound of traffic. The courthouse steps. The eyes watching from a distance. And the moment a single decision started a countdown that Officer Ryan Mitchell never saw coming. 43 minutes earlier, outside the courthouse, the final test had begun. The courthouse stood at the center of downtown Richmond like a monument to authority, its stone columns catching the bright light of a clear spring morning. Lawyers hurried across the wide front plaza carrying briefcases and case files. Reporters lingered near the entrance hoping for comments from attorneys involved in several high-profile hearings scheduled for the day. Uniformed officers moved through the crowd with practiced confidence, while courthouse employees checked identification and directed visitors toward security checkpoints. To most people passing through the area, it seemed like an ordinary day. Yet hidden beneath the routine movement of the morning was a tension nobody could quite identify. Several blocks away, unmarked vehicles occupied ordinary parking spaces. Men and women dressed like office workers watched the courthouse without drawing attention to themselves. Nothing about their appearance suggested law enforcement. That was exactly the point. The operation depended on remaining invisible. At precisely 9:17 in the morning, Naomi Carter stepped onto the sidewalk across from the courthouse entrance. She wore a modest gray coat over professional clothing and carried a simple leather shoulder bag. In one hand, she held a walking cane. Her pace was slow and measured as she crossed the plaza. People noticed her only briefly before continuing on with their day. That was also part of the plan. Naomi had spent months building a profile that would attract as little attention as possible. Every detail had been carefully considered. The clothing, the schedule, the route she walked. Even the cane itself served a purpose beyond what anyone could guess. Imagine walking into a place where dozens of people are watching, yet none of them realize they are being observed as carefully as they are observing others. Naomi moved calmly toward the courthouse steps. Her expression revealed nothing. Years of investigative work had taught her patience. She knew that important truths often appeared when people believed there would be no consequences for their behavior. Near the entrance, Officer Ryan Mitchell stood speaking with another officer. He looked exactly like the photographs in the investigation file. Tall, confident, comfortable in his authority. Several people greeted him as they passed. Ryan responded with easy smiles and casual conversation. To an outsider, he appeared to be a respected officer simply performing his duties. That image was one reason the investigation had taken so long. Public appearances rarely tell the whole story. Naomi continued toward the entrance. As she approached, she noticed small details that matched information from witness interviews and internal reports. Certain officers seemed unusually cautious around Ryan. Others appeared eager to gain his approval. Tiny moments, brief expressions, pieces of a puzzle she had been assembling for months. Somewhere inside the courthouse, a hearing was about to begin. Somewhere else, federal investigators were monitoring developments from a distance. The operation was entering its final stage. All that remained was observation. No confrontation, no accusations, just observation. Naomi tightened her grip on the cane and climbed the first courthouse step. Across the plaza, Ryan Mitchell finally noticed her. His eyes followed her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he pushed away from the courthouse wall and began walking in her direction. The final test had quietly begun. Ryan Mitchell crossed the courthouse plaza with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed he understood every situation before it unfolded. The morning sun reflected from the courthouse windows behind him as he adjusted the radio attached to his uniform. Around him, attorneys climbed the steps carrying legal files, reporters prepared for scheduled hearings, and visitors moved through the entrance without paying much attention to the officer making his way toward Naomi Carter. From a distance, the interaction seemed ordinary. One officer, one woman approaching the courthouse. Nothing more. Yet several unseen observers were quietly watching. Naomi continued her slow pace toward the entrance, her cane tapping lightly against the concrete. Her expression remained calm. She had learned long ago that people often revealed their true character during moments they considered insignificant. A brief conversation, a casual decision, a stranger crossing their path. Ryan stopped several feet in front of her. "Hold on a second," he said. His tone sounded casual, but there was something beneath it that immediately changed the atmosphere. Naomi looked up politely. "Good morning, officer." Ryan glanced at the cane before looking back at her. "What brings you here today?" Naomi answered calmly. "I am attending a hearing." Ryan folded his arms. "Which hearing?" Naomi gave the courtroom number. It was a simple answer, a truthful answer. Yet Ryan continued studying her as though something about her presence bothered him. Nearby, a courthouse employee briefly glanced in their direction before continuing inside. Naomi noticed everything. The employee, the security camera mounted above the entrance, the attorney standing 20 yards away pretending to check his phone. Every detail mattered. Ryan stepped slightly closer. "You carrying identification?" Naomi nodded. "Of course." She reached toward her bag. Before she could retrieve anything, Ryan interrupted. "Never mind." The words came too quickly, too dismissively. It was as though he had already decided what he thought about her. Imagine standing in front of someone who forms a conclusion before hearing a single fact. Imagine realizing that no answer you provide will matter because the decision has already been made. Naomi remained composed. Ryan looked toward the courthouse entrance, then back at her. "You know, people cannot just wander around federal property however they want." Naomi spoke carefully. "I understand that." "Do you?" Ryan replied. His expression hardened slightly. "Because lately we have had a lot of people showing up where they do not belong." The statement hung in the air. Naomi could feel several eyes drifting toward them from across the plaza. A pair of attorneys slowed their pace. A security officer near the entrance turned his head slightly. Nobody intervened. Nobody spoke. Ryan continued. "What exactly is in the bag?" Naomi answered with the same calm tone she had maintained since arriving. Personal items and court documents. Ryan seemed dissatisfied with the response. For a moment, he stared at the cane resting beside her. Then he looked back into her eyes. Naomi noticed something important. He was no longer evaluating facts. He was evaluating assumptions. That distinction mattered, because assumptions leave fingerprints that facts do not. Somewhere across the street, an investigator sitting inside an unmarked vehicle quietly made a note. Another observer near the courthouse entrance adjusted an earpiece. The operation continued exactly as planned. Ryan did not notice any of it. He believed this was simply another ordinary morning. He believed he controlled the interaction unfolding before him. What he could not see was that every word, every choice, and every judgment was slowly becoming part of a much larger file already bearing his name. Ryan's gaze settled once more on the cane beside Naomi. The courthouse entrance buzzed with activity behind them, but the space between the two felt strangely isolated, as though everything else had faded into the background. Naomi remained calm. Her posture never changed. Her expression never revealed irritation or fear. To Ryan, that composure seemed almost suspicious. He had expected nervousness. He had expected explanations. Instead, he found himself facing someone who appeared completely unbothered by his scrutiny. "Let me see that for a second," Ryan said, gesturing toward the cane. Naomi looked at him quietly. "Is there a reason?" she asked. Ryan shrugged. "Just a routine check." The explanation sounded casual, but several nearby pedestrians slowed their pace. Something about the interaction had begun drawing attention. Naomi glanced briefly toward the courthouse doors before looking back at Ryan. "It is a walking aid," she said politely. "I understand that," Ryan replied. "I still want to see it." Without waiting for further discussion, he reached toward the cane and examined it closely. He turned it over in his hands, studying it as though he expected to discover something unusual. Around them, the morning continued. Lawyers crossed the plaza. A delivery truck rolled past the courthouse. Yet a subtle tension had settled over the scene. Naomi remained still. She made no attempt to argue, no attempt to escalate the situation. Imagine watching someone search for a reason to justify a conclusion they already reached before the conversation began. That was exactly what several observers were witnessing. Across the street, an investigator sitting inside an unmarked vehicle recorded another note. Near the courthouse entrance, a woman pretending to review legal paperwork quietly watched the exchange through dark sunglasses. Neither intervened. The operation required patience. Ryan eventually handed the cane back. His expression suggested disappointment. He had found nothing. Yet instead of ending the interaction, he continued questioning her. "You seem very comfortable around courthouses," he said. Naomi answered with a slight smile. "I have spent time in many of them." The response was true, just not in the way Ryan imagined. He shook his head. "Interesting." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ryan glanced toward a group of officers standing near the entrance. Confident that he had established control of the situation, he stepped back. To him, the encounter was already finished. Another ordinary interaction. Another stranger passing through his day. What he could not know was that every minute of the exchange had been observed, documented, and added to a growing timeline. Naomi accepted the cane and continued toward the courthouse steps. Her pace remained slow and steady. She never looked back. Ryan watched her for a moment before turning away. Around him, the plaza returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Footsteps echoed across the stone walkway. Yet hidden beneath that ordinary morning was a reality neither Ryan nor the people around him could fully see. The final stage of a federal investigation had just received something investigators had been waiting months to obtain. Not evidence hidden in a file. Not testimony behind closed doors. Something far more revealing. A glimpse of character displayed in plain sight for everyone to see. Naomi entered the courthouse and disappeared into the flow of attorneys, clerks, and visitors moving through the security checkpoint. To everyone around her, she was simply another attendee arriving for a hearing. Nobody stopped her. Nobody questioned her. The encounter outside appeared finished. Yet in reality, the most important part of the morning was only beginning. Several floors above the main lobby, a federal conference room remained occupied by investigators monitoring developments from a distance. Documents covered the large table. Complaint summaries, interview notes, internal reviews, and financial records had been organized into carefully labeled folders. Months of work filled the room. On one wall, a timeline stretched across multiple boards. Names, dates, and incidents connected together through colored markers and reference numbers. At the center of that timeline sat a familiar name, Ryan Mitchell. The investigation had not started with him. It had started with a single complaint that seemed insignificant at the time. Then another complaint surfaced. Then another. Individually, each report appeared easy to dismiss. Together, they began forming a pattern. Witnesses described similar experiences. Certain administrative records seemed incomplete. Several internal reviews had ended without clear explanations. None of the findings alone justified a major federal inquiry. Combined, they raised serious questions. Questions that refused to disappear. That was why Naomi Carter had become involved. For 8 months, she had operated quietly behind the scenes, gathering information and verifying facts. She interviewed people who were afraid to speak publicly. She reviewed reports others had overlooked. She spent countless hours separating rumor from evidence. Every conclusion required documentation. Every allegation required proof. That process was slow, but Naomi understood something many investigators never forget. The truth is strongest when it can survive scrutiny. Imagine spending months assembling a puzzle while knowing that one missing piece could determine whether the entire picture holds together. That was exactly where the investigation stood. Investigators had collected records. Witnesses had cooperated. Analysts had completed their reviews. Yet one final question remained. How would Ryan behave when he encountered someone he believed had no authority, no influence, and no ability to challenge him? That question mattered because character often reveals itself during ordinary moments. Not during formal interviews. Not during official hearings. During everyday interactions. Across town, Ryan continued his shift, believing the morning had gone well. He laughed with fellow officers near the courthouse entrance and exchanged casual conversation with courthouse staff. If he felt any concern about the woman he had encountered earlier, he did not show it. To him, the interaction barely deserved another thought. Meanwhile, inside a secure office, an investigator uploaded observation notes from the courthouse plaza. Another reviewed security footage. A third compared timestamps against previous records. Each piece was added to the growing file. None of them spoke dramatically. None of them celebrated. They simply documented facts. Naomi sat quietly in a courtroom gallery waiting for proceedings to begin. Her cane rested beside her seat. Her expression remained calm. She knew the operation was approaching its conclusion. Somewhere within the next few hours, a decision would be made. And if the evidence held together the way investigators believed it would, Ryan Mitchell was about to discover that the woman he underestimated outside the courthouse was never there by accident. The hearing concluded shortly after noon, and people began filtering out of the courtroom in small groups. Attorneys discussed schedules in the hallway. Reporters checked messages on their phones. Clerks carried stacks of documents between offices. To anyone passing through the building, it looked like another ordinary day inside a busy courthouse. Naomi Carter remained seated for several minutes after most of the gallery had emptied. Her cane rested beside her chair. A legal pad sat unopened on her lap. She appeared completely relaxed, yet her attention never drifted. Every movement around her mattered. Every conversation contributed another detail to the larger picture. Eventually, she stood and made her way toward a quieter corridor near the administrative offices. There, away from the crowds, she entered a conference room reserved under a different name. Inside, 3 investigators were already waiting. The blinds were partially closed. Several folders covered the table. A laptop displayed courthouse security footage from earlier that morning. One investigator looked up as Naomi entered. "How did it go?" Naomi placed the cane beside the wall and took a seat. "Exactly as expected," she replied. "No excitement. No celebration. Just certainty." Another investigator opened a folder and reviewed fresh notes. "The observation reports have already been submitted." Naomi nodded. "Good." For the next 20 minutes, the team reviewed developments from the courthouse plaza. Video timestamps were verified. Witness observations were compared. Existing findings were updated. One by one, pieces of information that once seemed disconnected continued aligning with remarkable consistency. The more they reviewed, the clearer the pattern became. Imagine spending months trying to understand who someone truly is, only to discover the answer was visible all along in the way they treated people they believed could not affect them. That realization sat at the center of the room. Across town, Ryan Mitchell had already left the courthouse assignment. He drove back toward district headquarters believing the day was nearly over. Traffic moved steadily along the afternoon streets. The radio played quietly inside his patrol vehicle. He had no reason to suspect anything unusual. In fact, his mood had improved. Earlier that afternoon, he had received a message directing him to attend a special departmental meeting later in the day. Ryan interpreted the invitation as good news. Perhaps a new assignment. Perhaps recognition from supervisors. Whatever the reason, he saw opportunity rather than danger. Meanwhile, inside the conference room, Naomi reviewed a message that had just arrived from federal leadership. A formal decision had been made. The operation would move to its final stage. The evidence had reached the threshold investigators needed. One final briefing would take place before the next step. Naomi closed the message and looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, clouds drifted across the afternoon sky. 8 months of work had led here. Countless interviews. Endless paperwork. Careful observation. Every part of the process had been necessary. Yet despite everything investigators had uncovered, Naomi found herself thinking about the simplest moment of all. A courthouse entrance. A stranger. A choice. Sometimes the smallest decisions reveal the largest truths. She gathered the folders from the table and placed them into a secure case. Then she stood. The final meeting was scheduled for later that afternoon. Ryan Mitchell believed he was walking toward an ordinary briefing. Naomi knew he was walking toward the moment when every assumption he had made that morning would finally collide with reality. Late that afternoon, district headquarters felt unusually quiet. Officers moved through the hallways with the subdued energy that often accompanies an important administrative meeting. Ryan Mitchell arrived 10 minutes early. He straightened his uniform, greeted several colleagues, and made his way toward the conference room listed in the message he had received earlier. Nothing about the invitation had seemed unusual. In fact, he felt confident as he approached the door. Throughout his career, meetings with leadership had often worked in his favor. He expected another routine discussion. Perhaps a new assignment. Perhaps recognition for recent work. Whatever the reason, concern never crossed his mind. Inside the conference room, a large screen illuminated one wall. Several senior officials were already seated around the table. A few unfamiliar faces occupied seats near the back of the room. Their presence caught Ryan's attention for a moment, but he quickly dismissed it. Government agencies frequently coordinated on administrative matters. There was no reason to think anything unusual was happening. He selected a chair near the center of the room and waited. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 3 o'clock. Conversations remained brief. Nobody appeared particularly relaxed. Ryan noticed the tension but assumed it related to budget discussions or departmental policy reviews. Then the conference room door opened. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Several people who had been quietly reviewing documents looked up at once. Ryan turned toward the entrance. For a brief moment, he thought he was mistaken. Then recognition struck him. Naomi Carter entered the room carrying a secure case. She no longer wore the gray coat from earlier that morning. Her professional attire and composed posture projected quiet authority. The cane remained with her, yet somehow the entire room now seemed to view her differently. More importantly, everyone appeared to know exactly who she was. Ryan felt a faint knot tighten in his stomach. Naomi walked calmly to the front of the room and placed the case on the conference table. A senior official stood and addressed the attendees. "Thank you for being here. This meeting concerns the completion of a federal review conducted in cooperation with multiple agencies." Ryan listened carefully. Something about the wording immediately felt different from what he had expected. The official continued. The review was supervised by Special Agent Naomi Carter. The room fell silent. Ryan stared forward. The words seemed to arrive in slow motion. Special Agent. For several seconds, he could not reconcile the title with the woman he had encountered outside the courthouse. Naomi opened the case and removed a credential holder. She placed it on the table beside several organized folders. No dramatic gestures. No raised voice. Just facts presented with quiet confidence. Imagine realizing that the person you underestimated only hours earlier was never an ordinary visitor at all. Imagine discovering that while you believed you were evaluating them, they had been evaluating you for months. Ryan felt every assumption from that morning replay inside his mind. The courthouse steps, the conversation, the cane, the questions. Every detail suddenly looked different. Naomi glanced toward the screen at the front of the room. "Thank you all for attending," she said calmly. "Today we will review the findings of an 8-month investigation." And in that moment, Ryan Mitchell understood that the meeting he believed would advance his future was actually the beginning of a reckoning he never saw coming. The conference room remained silent as Naomi Carter activated the presentation screen. A series of dates appeared first, followed by reports, timelines, and documented findings collected over the course of the investigation. Nobody interrupted. Nobody questioned the process. The evidence had already been reviewed by supervisors, legal advisors, and federal oversight personnel. This meeting was not about speculation. It was about conclusions. Ryan Mitchell sat motionless as page after page appeared on the screen. Some documents looked familiar. Others did not. Certain reports he barely remembered. Others he had assumed were long forgotten. Yet here they were, connected together in ways he had never anticipated. Naomi stood beside the screen with the same calm professionalism she had displayed throughout the day. Her voice never rose. She never pointed fingers. She simply presented facts. "The purpose of this review was not to confirm assumptions," she said. "The purpose was to verify patterns through evidence." Around the table, officials reviewed copies of the same materials. Every statement corresponded to a document. Every conclusion pointed back to verified records. Imagine spending years believing small decisions disappear once enough time passes, only to discover that every decision leaves a trail. That realization slowly settled over the room. Naomi advanced to the next slide. Witness interviews appeared. Administrative summaries followed. Communication records were reviewed. None of the information alone seemed dramatic. Yet together they painted a remarkably consistent picture. Several attendees exchanged glances as the presentation continued. The findings were difficult to ignore. Ryan stared at the screen. The confidence he had carried into the meeting had vanished completely. Then Naomi displayed the final section of the review. The room became noticeably quieter. A photograph appeared on the screen. The courthouse entrance. Morning sunlight. People moving across the plaza. Ryan immediately recognized the scene. For a moment he felt his stomach tighten. Naomi allowed the image to remain visible. "This morning," she said, provided the final observation required to complete the review. Nobody spoke. Every eye remained fixed on the screen. A sequence of documented observations followed. Nothing sensational. Nothing exaggerated. Just a record of behavior observed during what should have been an ordinary interaction. The significance was not in the event itself. The significance was what it revealed. Naomi looked toward the attendees. "Investigations often conclude with one final question," she said. "How does a person behave when they believe there will be no accountability?" The words seemed to echo through the room. Ryan lowered his eyes. He suddenly understood why the encounter outside the courthouse felt so important to the investigators. It was never about the cane. It was never about a courthouse visitor. It was about judgment, assumptions, character. Naomi closed the folder resting on the table. "We spent months reviewing records," she continued. Yet the clearest answer arrived during a simple public interaction. The room remained completely still. A senior official reviewed the final recommendation page and nodded. Another signed a document already waiting before him. The process moved forward quietly, professionally, and without drama. Ryan watched it happen in silence. The operation was finished. The review was complete. And for the first time all day, he fully understood that the woman he had underestimated outside the courthouse had never been part of the investigation by coincidence. She had been leading it all along. The meeting ended without applause, without celebration, and without any sense of triumph. One by one, officials gathered their documents and quietly left the conference room. The projector screen faded to black. The folders that had occupied the center of the table for hours were carefully secured and removed. What remained behind was silence. Ryan Mitchell stayed seated for a moment longer than everyone else. The confidence that had accompanied him into the room was gone. In its place was the uncomfortable weight of reflection. Across the table, Naomi Carter organized the final documents with the same calm professionalism she had displayed throughout the investigation. She did not appear angry. She did not appear satisfied. If anything, she seemed focused on closing a difficult chapter correctly. Eventually, Ryan looked up. For the first time all day, he saw her differently. Not as a stranger, not as someone he believed he understood after a brief encounter, but as a professional who had spent months searching for facts rather than assumptions. "How long?" he finally asked. Naomi paused. 8 months. Ryan slowly nodded. 8 months of interviews. 8 months of records. 8 months of observations. And in the end, one ordinary morning had revealed more than he ever expected. The realization settled heavily in the room. Outside the conference room windows, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the city skyline. Traffic moved through the streets below. People walked home from work. The world continued exactly as it had before. Yet for everyone involved in the investigation, something important had been reaffirmed. Accountability mattered. Character mattered. The small moments mattered. Naomi closed the final folder and stood. "Most people think investigations are about catching someone doing something dramatic," she said quietly. "Most of the time they are not. Most of the time they are about understanding how people treat others when they believe nobody important is watching." Ryan lowered his eyes. There was nothing to argue with. The truth did not require an argument. It simply existed. A few minutes later, Naomi left the conference room and walked through the hallway toward the exit. Employees passed by carrying files and discussing their schedules. None of them knew the full story. None of them knew how many months of work had led to that day. They only saw a woman walking calmly toward the front doors with a cane in one hand and a secure case in the other. As she stepped outside, the cool afternoon air greeted her. The courthouse stood in the distance, visible beyond several city blocks. She thought briefly about the morning, about the plaza, about the conversation, about how quickly people reveal themselves when given an opportunity. Then she continued walking. The operation was complete. The truth had spoken for itself. And somewhere behind her, inside offices and conference rooms, people would spend a long time discussing what had happened and what lessons should be learned from it. Because in the end, authority is not measured by a badge, a title, or a position. It is measured by judgment. It is measured by integrity. And the strongest test of character is often found in the way someone treats a stranger they believe can do nothing for them. The investigation had ended, but that lesson would remain long after the files were closed.